They tied my hands with the same rope they used on the mules. I remember that more than I remember the screaming. The rope still smelled of the animals. Rough, greasy, sweet in a sick kind of way. A man does not think about a thing like that unless he is trying very hard not to think about everything else. I am an old woman now. My hands shake when I pour my coffee. But I am going to tell you about a season of my life when I was 19 years old and I had stopped believing in tomorrow. And I am going to tell you about the man the whole territory was afraid of. The man who came for me when nobody else did. It was the spring of 1873. We were 3 weeks west of Santa Fe, my father and I, on a road that wasn't really a road. Just two faint lines worn into the dirt where wagons had gone before. Arizona territory. You have never felt heat like it unless you have been out there. By noon, the air shimmered above the ground like water that wasn't there. The mountains in the far distance never seemed to come closer no matter how long we drove. They just sat on the edge of the world, blue and patient, watching us. My mother had died the winter before, fever. She was sick for 9 days and then she was gone, and after that my father couldn't stand the house anymore. He said there was land in the territory. He said a man could start again out there where nobody knew his sorrows. So we sold what we had and we went. I didn't argue. I was 19 and I thought I understood grief. I understood nothing. I want you to picture him for a second. My father, Thomas Calloway, a big man, soft in the middle, with reading glasses he was too vain to wear in front of strangers. He hummed when he drove the wagon. Hymns mostly, but he forgot the words and just hummed the tune. The last morning of his life he was humming. I have tried for 50 years to remember which hymn it was and I never can. It happened fast. That is the part people don't understand who weren't there. They imagine a battle. There was no battle. There was a low place in the trail where the brush grew up close on both sides and we came through it, and then the world was full of men and horses and noise. They came out of the brush like they had grown from it. I counted 7 later in my memory. There might have been more. They were not Indians. I need you to hear that part clearly because of everything that came after. They were white men and Mexican men riding together, the kind they called comancheros in those days. Traders. They traded in cattle and guns and whiskey, and they traded in people, and they did not much care which. They wore good boots and bad hats, and they smelled of liquor at 10 in the morning. My father reached for the rifle under the seat. He never got close. I won't describe it. I have spent 50 years not describing it, and I am not going to start now. I will only say that one moment I had a father humming a hymn and the next moment I did not, and the sound I made when I understood it was not a sound I knew I could make. A man grabbed me by the hair and pulled me down off the wagon into the dirt. I bit him. I remember being proud of that in a far-off corner of my mind, even while the rest of me was coming apart. He hit me across the face hard enough that the sky went white and then very far away. When it came back, my wrists were tied with the mule rope, and a man was going through my father's pockets, and the world had ended. His name was Harlan Voss, the leader of them. I learned it later the way you learn the name of a sickness you have. He was not a big man, that surprised me. The cruel ones are not always big. He was lean and quick, with pale eyes that didn't quite line up with each other, so you never knew which one was looking at you. He smiled a great deal. That was the worst thing about him, looking back. He smiled the whole time like a man who was enjoying a pleasant afternoon. They put me with the others. That was the first I knew that there were others. There was a Mexican woman named Inia Cutes, older than me, with a face like a closed door. There was a girl, maybe 14, who never told me her name and never spoke at all the whole time. And there was a boy. He was the one that mattered, though I didn't know it yet. A small boy, 7 or 8 years old, with black hair and skin darker than the rest of us, and eyes that watched everything and gave away nothing. The other captives kept a little distance from him, the way frightened people will when they have learned that the world divides everyone into us and them. The boy was Apache. I didn't know it then. I had never seen an Apache. I had heard the stories, the same stories everybody heard, the stories that made grown men check the locks twice at night, devils, ghosts. They came out of the rocks and they were gone before you could raise a gun, and the things they did. I had heard all of it. I believed all of it. I was 19 and full of other people's fear. So when I saw the boy, I was afraid of him too. God forgive me. A child, tied like I was, beaten like I was, and I was afraid of him because of the color of his skin and 100 stories told by men who had never met an honest soul in their lives. That first night was the longest of my life, longer than the night my mother died. They camped in a dry wash where the men felt safe, and they built a fire and passed a bottle, and their laughter rolled out across the dark, and I lay in the dirt with the rope cutting my wrists, and I prayed. I prayed the way you only pray when you have nothing left, not for rescue. I had given up on rescue already. I prayed only that the morning would not come, because the morning meant the road, and the road meant wherever they were taking us, and I had begun to understand what kind of place that would be. A woman did not need to be told. You could see it in the way Voss looked at me when he thought I was asleep, like a man pricing a horse. I heard Iniacutes praying too, in Spanish, very quiet, and once deep in the night I heard the boy, not crying. He never cried, that boy. He was singing, almost too soft to hear, just a thread of sound, 3 or 4 notes over and over, in a language I didn't know. I have thought about that singing many times since. I think now it was a song his mother taught him. I think he was singing himself back to her in the only way he had left. In the morning, a man kicked me awake, and I learned that the morning had come after all, and that I was still alive, and that being alive was going to be the hard part. We traveled 4 days. I will not pretend I can give you all 4. They run together in my memory like wet paint, dust and heat and thirst and the rope. They gave us water, but never enough. They gave us food, hard biscuit, and once some dried meat, because a dead captive was worth nothing and a sick one not much more. Voss saw to it. He was careful with his property. That word is the right word. We were property. They talked about us the way you'd talk about a string of mules being driven to market. There was a place we were going, a trading rendezvous somewhere south, where men met to buy and sell the things that could not be bought and sold in daylight in a decent town. I gathered this from listening. I had nothing to do but listen, and I had learned that the men forgot we could understand them, the way you forget a dog can understand more than you think. They spoke of the prices they'd get. They spoke of the buyers who would be there. A man from Sonora who paid in gold. Another who only wanted them young. I want to stop here and tell you something, because you are listening to an old woman's voice, and it is easy to forget that I was a real girl once, with a real life ahead of me that somebody stole. I had a sweetheart back in Missouri. His name was Daniel, and he had freckles, and he had asked my father for my hand the spring before we left, and my father had said, "Wait, you're both too young, wait a year." I used to lie in that wash at night and think about Daniel and the year we never got. I think that is the cruelest thing about being taken. They don't just steal your tomorrow, they steal every tomorrow you had already spent in your mind. The wedding, the children, the little house, all of it gone, and nobody even knew to grieve it but me. On the 3rd night, I noticed the boy was gone from where he usually lay. I came awake all at once, the way you do when something is wrong. The fire was low. The men were sleeping, most of them, and one was supposed to be watching, but he was nodding where he sat, and the boy was not in his place. I lay very still and I looked, and I found him at last, crouched at the very edge of the firelight, as far from the men as his rope would let him go, and he was looking out into the dark. Just looking, like he was waiting for something. I followed his eyes. There was nothing out there but black and the shapes of rocks and the far-off mountains under the stars. And then there was something. It was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of a sound. The cicadas, you understand, never stopped out there. All night long, that dry rattling buzz, so constant you forgot it was there. And for just a moment, in one direction, off to the north of the camp, the cicadas stopped. A little pocket of silence moving through the noise. Then it passed and the buzzing closed back over it like water over a stone. The boy let out a breath. I saw his small shoulders come down, and though he never turned around, I had the strangest feeling lying there that he was no longer afraid. that something he had been waiting for had finally arrived. I did not sleep again that night. I watched the dark where the silence had been, and I felt, for the first time in 4 days, that there was someone out there who was not my enemy. I just didn't know yet that he was about to become the most important person I would ever meet. The rendezvous was worse than anything I had let myself imagine. We came down into it on the morning of the 5th day. It sat in a wide bowl of land with a muddy spring at the bottom, and there were maybe 30 men camped there, and tents, and a brush corral full of stolen horses, and the smell of it reached us before we saw it. Wood smoke and whiskey and animals and something underneath all of it that I can only call the smell of bad men with money. I have smelled it twice more in my long life, in places I won't name, and both times my hands started shaking and I had to sit down. There were other captives there already. That was the thing that took the last of my hope. I had been telling myself in some childish corner of my heart that this was rare, that surely the world did not allow such things to happen often. And then we came down into that bowl and I saw them. A dozen more. Women and children mostly. Some Mexican, some Indian, 2 or 3 white. They were kept together in a rough pen made of brush and rope, and they sat in the dust with the particular stillness of people who have stopped expecting anything. They put us in with them. Voss handled it himself, businesslike, like a man delivering goods. He cut the rope between my wrists, just enough to let me crawl into the pen, then tied me again to a stake driven deep in the ground. He worked the knot, and as he worked it he looked up at me with those eyes that didn't agree with each other, and he smiled and he said, "Tomorrow you'll fetch a fine price, missy. Don't you fret. A pretty thing like you'll go to a rich man, better than the alternative." And then he laughed soft, like we shared a joke, and walked away. I've hated many things in my life. I never hated anything the way I hated that man's kindness. The boy was tied near me. We were the last 2 on the line. The others in the pen had drawn away from him, the same as before, that animal instinct of the frightened to push the strangest one to the edge. So he and I ended up side by side, the white girl and the Apache child, the 2 nobody wanted to sit beside. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was that we were both at the end of the line, in every way a person can be. I reached over as far as my rope would let me, and I put my hand on his small shoulder. He flinched. Of course he did. Every hand that had touched him in days had hurt him. But I held it there, gentle, and after a moment he stopped flinching, and after another moment he leaned the smallest amount toward me, just a little weight against my hand. And I will tell you, I had not wept since the day on the trail. I had been too far gone for weeping, but I wept then, quietly. For him and for me, and for my father humming his hymn, and for everything that was ending in that filthy bowl of land. That night they had a fire and a fiddle, and the men got drunk, drunker than any night on the trail, because they were among their own kind now and they felt safe. Buyers had come in during the afternoon. I saw the man from Sonora, fat and well-dressed, walking the line of captives in the evening light with Voss beside him, pointing, pricing. He stopped in front of me a long while. I looked at the ground. I have never in my life wanted so badly to be ugly. After he passed, the boy spoke to me. The first time he ever spoke. He had a little English I learned, picked up I never knew where. He said, very low, not looking at me, "Tonight." Just that one word. I didn't understand. I said, "What, honey, what about tonight?" And he said, "My uncle is here." I thought the fear had finally broken his mind. I thought, this poor child, his people are dead or scattered, and he has dreamed up an uncle to come and save him, the way I dreamed up Daniel and the year we never got. I squeezed his shoulder and I said something soft and meaningless, the way you do. He turned and looked at me then. And his eyes were not the eyes of a child who is dreaming. They were calm, calm in a way that frightened me more than all of Voss's smiling. "You stay close to me," he said. "When it starts, you stay close. He will not know you in the dark. You must be where I am." And then he faced front again and would say no more. I want to describe the camp to you the way it was that night, because the rest of what I tell you will mean nothing if you don't see it. 30-some armed men, drunk and confident, in a bowl of land they thought was safe. A ring of campfires, horses in the brush corral, restless. The dark coming down hard and complete, the way it does in that country. No moon that night, only the stars, which out there are so many and so bright that they give a faint silver light to everything, just enough to see shapes, not enough to see faces. And somewhere out in that dark, beyond the firelight, something was waiting, something that had followed this band of men for days, something that moved through the cicada song and left a little silence behind it. I had felt it on the trail. I had stopped being afraid of it. The boy was not afraid of it. The boy was waiting for it the way you wait for sunrise. The men, of course, felt nothing. They drank and they laughed, and one of them played that fiddle, badly, the same 3 reels over and over, and Voss sat by the big fire counting on his fingers, counting his money before he had it, and the night got later and later, and the fires got lower, and one by one the men began to sleep. I did not sleep. The boy did not sleep. We sat side by side, tied to our stakes, 2 small figures at the end of the line, and we watched the dark. Here is a thing I have never told anyone in 50 years. Around the middle of the night, when the camp had gone quiet, when even the fiddle had stopped, I heard the boy begin to sing again. That same thread of song, 3 or 4 notes, soft as breath. But this time it was different. This time it was not a song of grief. I understood that without understanding the words. This time it was a signal. He sang it 3 times, very low, and then he stopped. And out in the dark far off, so faint I might have dreamed it, something sang it back. The boy's whole body went still. Then he reached over in the dark and found my hand, and gripped it with all the strength in his small fingers. "Now," he whispered, "stay close, whatever you see, stay close to me." I did not know what was coming, but I gripped his hand back, and I turned my face toward the dark to the north, and for the first time in 5 days I was not praying for the morning to stay away. I was praying for whatever was out there to hurry. The first thing was the horses. The brush corral on the far side of the camp from us exploded. There is no other word. 30 stolen horses going from sleep to blind terror in a single heartbeat, screaming, smashing through the brush fence, pouring out into the dark in every direction. A wall of sound and dust and pounding hooves. And the men came up out of their blankets shouting, half drunk, grabbing for guns, running toward the corral, toward the noise, toward the disaster they could hear and not see. Every man in that camp ran toward the horses, toward the north side, away from us. That was when I understood that the boy's uncle was not a devil out of a story. He was a soldier, a general. Whatever it was out there in the dark, it had thought, it had planned. It had spent days learning these men, and it had chosen this night and this hour, and it had reached in and pulled one thread, the horses, and the whole camp came running the wrong way. And in the confusion, in the dark, on the empty south side of the camp, a shadow came over the brush fence of the captive pen without a sound. I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because what I expected and what was real were 2 different worlds, and the difference between them changed me for the rest of my life. I expected a monster. I had been raised on monsters. What came over that fence was a man. He moved low and fast and silent, and even in the starlight I could see that he was made all of muscle and purpose, stripped down for the work he had come to do. There was paint on his face, dark lines, and a knife in his belt and a short bow across his back, and I had every reason in the world to be more afraid of him than of anything I had ever seen. I was not afraid. I don't know how to explain it except to say that the boy's hand was in mine and the boy was not afraid, and the boy's whole body had filled up with a joy so fierce and pure that it ran up my arm like warmth. This was his uncle. This was the thing he had waited for. And whatever the stories said, whatever the whole territory believed, I knew in that instant, deep in my bones, that this man had not come to that camp to kill for the joy of it. He had come for one small boy. He had crossed I don't know how many miles of that terrible country, alone, against 30 armed men, for one child of his blood. He came straight to the boy. Of course he did. In all that camp there was only one thing he wanted. He dropped down beside him and his hands went to the rope and there was a flash of the knife and the boy was free, and the man pulled him up and held him against his chest for one single heartbeat. One. That was all the time there was for tenderness, but I saw it. I saw this fearsome man, this thing out of nightmare, hold a child the way my own father used to hold me. And I saw the boy's face pressed into his uncle's neck. And I understood that everything I had ever been taught about these people was a lie told by men like Harlan Voss to excuse the things they did. Then it was over and he was moving again, turning to go, the boy in his arm, back toward the fence and the dark and freedom. And the boy spoke. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew what he was saying because his small free hand was pointing at me. The man stopped, he turned, and for the first time in the starlight his eyes found mine. I have never in my life been looked at like that before or since. He looked at me the way a man looks at a problem, a white woman, a stranger, not his blood, not his people, nothing to him, every reason to leave me where I lay. I was an extra weight, a slower escape, a risk. He had what he had come for. The smart thing, the safe thing was to go. The shouting was still coming from the north side of the camp, but it was changing. The men were beginning to understand that the horses were a trick. Soon they would turn around. Soon they would come back. Every second this man stood here looking at me was a second closer to his own death. The boy spoke again. Just one word, the same word he had said to me that afternoon. The word I now understood meant something like family, something like ours, something like one of us. He said it about me, a white girl he had known for one day, who had put her hand on his shoulder when no one else would. And the warrior made his choice. He came to me. The knife flashed and my ropes fell away and his hand closed around my arm and pulled me up. And his grip was iron, but it was not cruel, and he looked into my face for one more half-second, and what he said I will never know, 2 or 3 words in his own tongue, low and hard. But I understood the meaning the way you understand a current pulling at your legs. Move, now, stay with the boy, live. And then we were running. I will not pretend I remember it clearly. It is all broken pieces, the brush fence tearing at my dress. The boy's hand in mine, his uncle ahead of us, a shape in the dark that we followed because following it was the only thing in the world. The ground rushing up under my feet, rocks and brush, and behind us the shouting turning into screaming as the men found the empty pen and understood what had been done to them. A gun went off, then another. They were firing into the dark, blind, terrified at shadows. A bullet struck a rock near my head and sang away into the night. I have never run like that. I did not know a body could run like that. The man ahead of us never looked back, never slowed, just led, and the dark closed around us, and the camp and its fires fell away behind, and still we ran. We ran until I could not run, until my legs gave out and I went down in the dirt and could not get up. And the man came back and pulled me up and half carried me, and we went on, slower now, into the broken country to the south, into a maze of rock and gully that he seemed to know the way a man knows his own house. I don't know how long, hours. The stars wheeled overhead. At some point the boy was riding on his uncle's back, and at some point I realized the man had been guiding me with one hand at my elbow over the worst of the ground, in the dark, never once losing his footing, never once losing his way. When the eastern sky finally began to gray, we were miles from that bowl of land, high up in the rocks, and the man stopped at last in a hidden place among the boulders where a little water seeped from the stone. He let me drink first. I want you to hear that. After everything, after the risk I had been to him, he cupped the water in his hands and held it out to me first, before the boy, before himself. Then the boy, then himself last. We rested there through the heat of the day. I slept, finally, the first real sleep in 5 days, and when I woke the sun was low and the man was sitting with his back against a rock, watching the country we had come from, and the boy was curled against his side asleep, with the man's hand resting on his hair. He caught me looking. We had no language between us, But he looked at me and he looked at the boy asleep against him, and then he looked back at me and he touched his own chest, and then he gestured out toward the east, toward where the settlements were, where my own people were. And I understood. He was telling me he would take me to where I belonged. He did not have to do that. He had a long, hard road of his own ahead, getting that boy home to whatever was left of their people. A white woman was nothing but danger to him every mile of the way. If a patrol saw him with me, if a single rancher caught sight of an Apache man and a white woman together, they would shoot first and never ask a question. He knew that better than I did, and he chose to take that risk day after day to bring a stranger home. It took 3 days. 3 days of moving by night and hiding by day, of him sharing what little food he could find, rabbit and roots and once some birds' eggs, always giving me and the boy the larger share. 3 days in which I learned more about decency from a man I could not speak a word to than I had learned in 19 years of church on Sundays. On the third night we came over a rise, and below us far off were lights. A town. A real town with windows lit, and the boy said the name of it, which he must have learned somewhere, and it was a town I knew, a town with a stage road and a telegraph and people who would help me. My own world, waiting down there in the dark. The man stopped. He would come no closer, and we both knew why. He crouched down, and the boy came and stood in front of me, and the boy looked up at me with those eyes that had stopped giving anything away days ago but were giving everything away now, and he said, in his careful English, "He says you are brave. He says the woman who touched my shoulder is brave." I knelt down in the dirt and I took that boy's face in my hands and I kissed his forehead, and I could not speak. And then I looked up at the man, the warrior, the thing the whole territory was afraid of, the man who had come alone against 30 for a child and had carried home a stranger he owed nothing, and I tried to find words and there were none. In any language, there were none. So I just put my hand over my heart and I held it there and I looked at him and I let him see all of it, everything I could not say. He looked back at me for a long moment, and then he did something I did not expect. He smiled. Not Voss's smile, that terrible smile of a man enjoying himself. A real one, brief and tired and kind, the smile of a man at the end of a hard thing well done. He touched the boy's shoulder. He nodded to me once. And then he turned, and the boy with him, and the two of them walked back into the dark, and the dark took them, and I never saw either one of them again. I went down to the town alone. I told them my name was Ruth Calloway and that my father was dead on the trail and that I had escaped, and that was all I ever told them, all of them, for 50 years, because I knew what they would do with the truth. I knew how they would take the most decent man I ever met and make him fit their stories. So I lied. I said I got loose in the confusion and ran. I let them believe it was luck. It was not luck. It was a man who owed me nothing and gave me everything. I am old now, and the territory is a state, and the men like Voss are mostly dead or forgotten, and the stories people still tell about the Apache make my blood run cold for an entirely different reason than they used to. Because I knew one. I knew one for 4 days, 3 of them on the run, and he was braver and kinder and more honorable than any man who ever sat safe in a town and called him a devil. I never learned his true name. The boy tried to teach it to me on the trail, and my clumsy tongue could never hold it, and we both laughed, which was a strange and beautiful thing to laugh out there. The boy told me it meant something like the one who does not turn back. I have carried that for 50 years. The one who does not turn back. He could have turned back 100 times. From the camp. From me. From the long road home with a white woman.